Today's video is going to cover section 4.4, which is on graphing lines using intercepts. So this is going to give us another way to graph lines that are in a certain form. So before we really get into this, we need to talk about what intercepts are. So the x-intercept is just the x-coordinate of the point where a line crosses the x-axis. Okay, so the x-coordinate of the point where a line crosses the x-axis. So then similarly, the y-intercept is just the y-coordinate of the point where a line crosses the y-axis. Okay, so that's the main vocab we'll be working with. So first we're just going to look at a graph and make sure we can kind of find these points on a graph and use them to quickly sketch the graph of a line. So if I look at example 1, it says graph a line whose x-intercept is 7 and the y-intercept is -1. So if my x-intercept is 7, I'm going to look along the y-axis and I'm going to find the point where the x-coordinate is 7. So that's right here. Now my y-intercept is -1, so now I'm looking along my y-axis, and here's -1. And so to graph that line, all I have left to do is to connect up those 2 points. So there's my line. Okay, now in this example, my x-intercept now is -3, so I'm going to be careful to go to the left here where x is -3. My y-intercept is a +5, so I'm going to go up 5. And then again, I can use those 2 points to graph my line. Okay, so now we're going to take a look. Let me flip the page here. Not here yet. Here we go. Finding intercepts given a graph. So now we have the opposite situation. We're given a graph and we need to find the y-intercept and the x-intercept of the line below. So let's take a look at our x-intercept, and I'm going to use INT for short. So my x-intercept, I know I'm looking along my x-axis, and I'm looking to see where my line crosses the x-axis. So if my x-axis is here, my line crosses it at this point, and that x-coordinate is just 1. So that's my x-intercept. For my y-intercept, again, I'm looking where I cross the y-axis here, and it looks like that happens right here at 4. So my y-intercept is 4. Again, we're only giving the x or y coordinate, so that's why I'm not writing an ordered pair. Okay, so now for part B, again, for my x-intercept, I'm looking along the x-axis for where that line crosses the x-axis. That happens here at 3. And then for my y-intercept, looking for where I cross the y-axis, and that happens here at 1. So that's probably the easiest case if we have a line and we're just using the graph to find those intercepts. But we can also do this pretty easily given an equation. And so I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do this and kind of a shortcut that I like. So first of all, I want to go back here. So we said the x-intercept is just the x-coordinate of the point where I cross the x-axis. So if I were to look at this point, my x-coordinate's 3, and then my y-coordinate's 0, because I don't go up or down from that point. So one thing to note is if I'm looking at the x-intercept, x-intercept, my y-coordinate is going to be 0 at that point. Similarly here, if I were to look at my y-intercept in red, that x-coordinate is 0. I don't move left or right. I just go up 1. So if I'm looking at the y-intercept, my x-coordinate is 0. So those two facts make it really easy to find the intercepts given an equation. So here's my equation. Let's say I want to find the x-intercept. We just said for the x-intercept, my y-coordinate is 0. So to find the x-intercept, I'm going to take my equation, but I'm going to plug in 0 for y. And then solve for x. So in this case, I have 7x minus 3 times 0 equals 21. Well, 3 times 0 is just 0, so I get 7x equals 21. I can easily solve that. Let me zoom in here. Easily solve that by dividing on 7 both sides, and if I do that, I get x is equal to 3. So my x-intercept is 3. Sorry, that's a little foggy. Let's see if we can do better than that. All right. Now, I want to find my y-intercept next. So we said that at the y-intercept, we know our x-coordinate is 0. So now to find the y-intercept, I'm going to plug in 0 for x and solve for y. And so I'm going to do that work over here. So we'll kind of ignore this just to get us some space. So I'm going to show this work here. So now I have 7 times 0 minus 3y equals 21. 7 times 0 is just going to give me 0. So I have a negative 3y equals 21. To get y by itself, I'm going to divide by a negative 3, and I get y equals negative 7. So my y-intercept is negative 7. Now, in both cases, when I plugged in 0, in this case, let's say I plugged in 0 for the y value, that y term just dropped out. Similarly here, when I plugged in 0 for x, the x term just dropped out. So I like to do a little shortcut when I'm doing these problems, and we'll do it with this try problem here. I like to call it, for kind of lack of a better term, just the cover-up method. So here's how that goes. If I want to find the x-intercept, I'm just going to cover up the y term and solve what's left for x. So for instance, if I have 4x minus 6y equals 12, I'm literally just going to cover up that 6y, or minus 6y, and what I have left is 4x equals 12. Now that's just a simple one-step equation. I divide by 4, and I get x is equal to 3. So my x-intercept is 3. Now if I want to find my y-intercept, all right, sorry about that. I had to pause it for a second. Okay, now to find our y-intercept, we are going to cover up the x term and solve for y. So now what I'm going to do, I cover up my 4x, and what I have left, I'm careful to take my negative 6y is equal to 12, If I divide by -6 on both sides, I get y equals -2. So I get a y-intercept of -2. Okay, so that's how we find our x and y-intercept from the equation. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the next group, because I don't want the video to go too long. But I just want to look at these equations here. So we're still finding the x and y intercepts, and really the only difference here, the process is going to be the same, it's just that they're not going to work out quite as nicely as the other ones. So for example, let's find the x-intercept. So I know if I'm finding the x-intercept, I cover up y. So now I'm going to get 7x equals 8. So if I divide by 7, I'm going to get a fraction answer. So that is my x-intercept, but obviously not quite as handy if I wanted to graph that. It'd be a little harder to graph 8/7. Same thing, if I go to do the y-intercept and I cover up x, I get -5y equals 8. Whoops, I didn't want to put that there. I'm going to move that down. So my equation is -5y equals 8. So I divide on both sides by -5, and my intercept is -8/5. So again, just not quite so nice as the other ones. We'll kind of leave that there. So now the last piece of this is kind of putting it all together. And so we'll go over a few of these examples. So now we actually want to graph. Given an equation, we're going to graph by finding the intercepts. So we're just going to follow quick few steps. The first is to find the x and y intercepts. Once we have the x and y intercepts, we're going to plot the intercepts on the graph. So plot them on the coordinate plane. And then we're going to connect the points with a straight line. And that'll give us our graph. So it's actually a pretty quick way of graphing these equations. Okay, so we'll do maybe just a couple of these, and then you'll have plenty of time to practice. So let's go ahead. Let's do our x-intercept here. So I know to find my x-intercept, I cover up y. My finger's probably too big there. So if I use my pen, maybe you can kind of see that. So I get 4x equals 8. If I divide by 4 on both sides, I'm going to get x equals 2. So my x-intercept is 2. My y-intercept, this actually works out pretty nicely. When I cover up my x, y is already by itself. So I have a y-intercept. My equation is y equals 8, so my y-intercept is 8. So now for my x-intercept, I go along the x-axis to where x is equals 2, and I plot a point. On my y-axis, for my y-intercept, I go to where the y is positive 8 and make a point. And then I'm just going to connect those with a straight line. And that's how I graph using the intercepts. Okay, let's do part B. Same thing. So now I have my x-intercept. So again, to do that, I'm going to cover up my y. Nice thing here is x is already by itself. Our equation is x equals -8, so our x-intercept is just -8. Now to find the y-intercept, I'm going to cover up the x. And so I'm careful, I need to take my negative with me. So I have -2y equals -8. I'm going to divide on both sides by -2. And now I have y equals a positive 4. So my y-intercept is 4. So now my x-intercept is a -8. So I'm going to go here to the left to -8. Y-intercept is a positive 4. And so I'm going to connect those points. All right. Let's see. Why don't you pause the video now and try the try problem. I'll work the solution out, so when you unpause, you can check your answer. Okay, so if you graph this correctly, this is how your line should look. Make sure you have the correct signs for your x's and or your x and y intercepts. And if you're good there, you can go ahead and try the homework.